Gallienne, Northern Kingdoms, winter, 1451. The forest groaned under the weight of snow. Trees stood like ancient sentinels, bare, blackened, skeletal. Overhead, the sky was a canvas of gray linen, stretched tightly with no hint of sun. In this pale, breathless world, a single figure trudged along the winding road of stone and frost. A young nun in a threadbare black habit, her veil heavy with ice. She had walked for 2 days through the hills of Gallienne, her footsteps silent as prayers. Her name was Sister Elira, and she was not yet 20. Her skin, once fair, was windburnt and raw, her lips chapped, but her eyes, dark, watchful, unreadable, burned with quiet defiance. She hadn't spoken in 5 years, not since the fire, not since the soldiers. The silence had become her home. Before her, perched atop a cliff wrapped in white fog, rose St. Veritas Monastery, a fortress of gray stone and whispered legends. Its towers pierced the sky like the bones of a dead cathedral. Ivy clung to the outer walls like the fingers of forgotten saints. Gargoyles leered from the rooftops, mouths open in mourning, not welcome. It was not a place for salvation. It was a place for secrets. As she neared the outer gates, a bell tolled, deep and slow, as if struck underwater. The gate creaked open a moment later, revealing an old nun in a thick wool cloak. Her eyes were sharp, her face lined like parchment, her hands gloved in cracked leather. She was Sister Marianne, the gatekeeper of St. Veritas. "You are from St. Orlaine?" the old nun asked, voice gravelly. Elira bowed her head. Sister Marianne studied her. "You are younger than I was told. Follow me. The wind bites today." They passed through a narrow stone archway into the monastery's inner courtyard. It was bleak, flagstones split by frost, statues veiled in ice. Around the cloisters, stone corridors snaked into darkness. Somewhere a crow cawed from the belfry. Elira's cell was in the south wing. It was bare, a straw mattress, a wooden cross, a chipped bowl of water, and a single candle. The window was narrow, admitting only snowlight. Her breath curled in the cold air. There was no fire. Later that evening, she joined the others for supper. The refectory was vast and candlelit. Dozens of nuns sat in silence at long wooden tables. All wore the same dull black robes. None looked up. They ate soup with stale bread and drank water in silver goblets that bore the monastery's crest. A sword crossed with a flame. At the far end sat Mother Sabina, the abbess. She was tall, with ivory skin and sunken cheeks. Her eyes were blue, cold as glaciers, and never once blinked as they scanned the room. She did not smile. She did not pray. She simply watched. That night, Elira lay awake in her cell, listening. Somewhere beyond her thin walls, something moved. Not footsteps, scraping. A low drag, as if stone were being drawn across stone. Then, silence. The next morning, her routine began. Lauds at 5, manual labor at 6, prayer until 9, copying scripture until dusk. Silence always. The sisters were disciplined, their lives divided by bells and candle marks. Elira was set to help in the scriptorium, where she copied ancient Latin texts onto vellum. But even here, she felt something was off. Certain books were chained to the wall. Others, curiously, had pages torn out. And one, marked with a red thread, was always locked away before nightfall. She asked no questions. She had taken a vow of silence, and even if she hadn't, there was no safety in asking at St. Veritas. Still, she noticed things. There was a door in the eastern corridor, always locked, always guarded. No one went near it. The other nuns avoided the eastern wing entirely, pretending it didn't exist. And there were names. Names whispered and then lost. Sister Celine, Sister Agnes, Sister Heloise. They had once been listed on the prayer rosters, but now their names were gone, erased. When Elira asked Sister Marianne about Celine with a glance, the old nun replied only, "Celine is with the Lord." But there was no funeral, no mourning, only silence. One night during her assigned hour, tending the chapel candles, Elira noticed something. Far across the nave, the eastern door, normally shut, was ajar. The hallway beyond it glowed faintly, as if lit from within. She stood frozen. Then from the shadows, she heard it. A voice, a woman's voice, whispering in Latin. Audi me, hear me. The voice was neither loud nor pleading. It was calm, patient, as if it had waited centuries. Elira stepped forward only once. The door creaked shut. The chapel was dark again. She returned to her cell, heart pounding. That night she dreamed of fire. Not the fire that took her family, but of a different blaze. A woman in red robes, bound in chains, surrounded by nuns in black, who wept as they turned away. The chained woman's eyes met Elira's. They were not cruel. They were not holy. They were knowing. Elira awoke in cold sweat. The crucifix on her wall had fallen. Part 2. The 13th Door. The flicker of a candle stretched long across the cold stone floor, trembling faintly in the corridor's stillness. And then, the eastern door, the one that was always locked, always forbidden, stood slightly ajar. Elira froze. No footsteps, no sound. Only a dim sliver of pale light spilling through the narrow crack, like moonlight through mist, like breath from something not quite dead. Her heart beat louder than her thoughts. The hallway around her was empty, silent, still. From within the room came a faint sound, the soft clinking of rosary beads tapping against stone, slow and deliberate, as if someone had just left, or was still inside, waiting. Elira took one careful step forward, then another. She hesitated, her fingers hovering near the edge of the heavy oak door. No one had spoken of this place. No prayer mentioned it. No nun ever approached it. It was as if the eastern wing didn't exist. And yet, she pushed gently. The door creaked open with the sigh of ancient wood, revealing a narrow spiral staircase descending into darkness. There were no torches along the walls, no lanterns, only a damp chill that coiled around her like a shroud, and a scent, wet stone, mildew, and something iron, something like dried blood. She should have turned away. She didn't. Clutching her habit tighter, Elira stepped into the dark, one foot on the worn stone stair, the other still anchored in the world above. The moment she passed the threshold, the door behind her clicked shut with a soft finality, and the light vanished. She descended, slowly. Each step echoed like a whisper from below, and as she went deeper, the air thickened, not with dust, but with a pressure that felt ancient, almost sentient. Then she saw it, a faint glow flickering at the bottom of the staircase, red and gold, like firelight dancing against stone. She followed it, drawn not by courage but by something older than fear, something inside her that had been waiting, listening. At the base of the stairs, the chamber opened wide. It was circular, with vaulted ceilings and carved pillars that bore symbols she had never seen before. Not Latin, not scripture, but something older, etched in sweeping lines and jagged angles. In the center stood a marble altar, stained in rust red. Upon it, chains slick with oil, and around it, 12 statues in black robes, their faces veiled, hands clasped in silent prayer. Elira's breath caught, but what chilled her most was the 13th space, an empty pedestal. No statue, only a shattered rosary and a name scratched into the stone, so deeply it looked carved in desperation. Agnes. A wind stirred from nowhere, though the air had no place to move. And then, a voice, not loud, not sharp, but inside her. She remembered. Do you? Elira turned, but she was alone. Or, not quite. From the far wall, a shadow moved, and behind the altar, something stirred. Part 3. Whispers beneath the veil. The shadow behind the altar lingered. Elira's breath caught in her throat, frozen by a primal fear she didn't yet understand. Her bare feet stepped backward instinctively, but the heavy silence pressed inward, as though the room itself would not allow her to leave. The flickering torchlight dimmed, as if smothered by unseen hands. She looked again toward the empty pedestal marked Agnes. The name wasn't just carved, it was gouged, as though someone had tried to scratch it into the stone with fingernails, over and over again. Her gaze lifted to the veiled statues surrounding the altar. 12 in total. They hadn't moved, But something about them had changed. Their hands, once gently clasped in prayer, now looked tense, as if gripping something tightly. The robes, were they darker than before? A low sound hummed through the chamber. Not a voice, not exactly. More like a memory speaking through stone. They offered silence, but silence is never empty. Elora turned her head sharply. No one. And yet, again, that feeling, a presence behind her, watching. She asked questions. She opened the 13th veil. Illyra's hand went to her chest where her own rosary hung, dull and worn. She looked at the shattered one on the pedestal. Agnes. Who was she? The light above the altar flickered, and for a split second, the veil of the 13th statue was no longer empty. A face, gaunt, pale, lips sewn shut with black thread, eyes open, wide, terrified, and alive. Illyra staggered back, slamming into one of the stone columns. When she blinked, the face was gone. The pedestal stood empty once more. Her heart pounded like thunder in her ears. She had to leave. She turned toward the staircase, but the door at the top had sealed, not locked, gone, as if it had never been there. She wasn't alone now, and she hadn't been, from the moment she stepped through that door. From the shadows beyond the altar, a soft shuffle echoed, and then a whisper so close it kissed the back of her ear. What do you remember, Illyra? Agnes. A wind stirred from nowhere, though the air had no place to move. And then, a voice, not loud, not sharp, but inside her. She remembered. Do you? Illyra turned, but she was alone. Or, not quite. From the far wall, a shadow moved, and behind the altar, something stirred. What do you remember, Illyra? The voice wasn't loud. It was inside her, like a prayer turned inside out. Not asking, but taking. Illyra turned sharply, but there was no one behind her, only the dark, and that creeping, unbearable sense that she was being seen. Who are you? She whispered, but her voice didn't echo. It was as though the chamber absorbed her words, swallowed them, and returned only silence. No, not silence. There was a sound now, faint, distant, a woman humming a lullaby, low, broken, haunting. A melody that seemed familiar, though she couldn't remember where she'd heard it. She stepped toward the altar. The broken rosary on the Agnes pedestal shifted slightly, as if touched by a breeze, but there was no wind. And when Illyra reached out to touch it, the world shifted, not violently, not even suddenly, but like a memory slipping back into place. The chamber dimmed, then brightened, not with firelight, but with the soft gold glow of morning sun through stained glass. Except there was no window, and standing before her, in the center of the chamber, was a girl, no older than 14, in a white novice's habit, barefoot, pale, her head bowed, hands clasped in prayer. Illyra couldn't speak. The girl raised her head, slowly, and opened her eyes. They were the same as hers. You left me, the girl said. Illyra gasped, but the girl didn't move closer. They said to forget, but forgetting is a kind of death. The image flickered. Now the girl stood at the altar, her hands chained, lips sewn shut, blood dripping onto the marble, her eyes still staring straight into Illyra's. Then suddenly, fire. The altar lit up, bursting into unnatural flame. Cold blue and sickly white, not warm, not real. The statues around her turned their heads in unison, their veils dissolving into ash midair. Beneath them, their faces were not human, not entirely. Some were eyeless, others mouthless. All of them wore expressions of pain twisted into mockery, as if prayer had broken them long ago, and now they prayed only to remember how to suffer. The girl's voice echoed again, louder now, from within the fire. You must remember, or I will never leave, Illyra screamed. But her scream never left her lips, because she wasn't in her body anymore. She was in the girl's, chained, gagged, praying, and she remembered. Her name was not Illyra, not only. Part 5. The Vow Remembered. The silence after the flame felt heavier than sound. Illyra stood in stillness, her breath caught in her chest, The cold of the chamber now forgotten, replaced by the weight of something much older than fear. The girl in white was gone. The altar burned no longer. And yet, the room had changed. It remembered. The stone beneath her feet bore faint traces of ancient footsteps. The walls, cracked and stained, now whispered with echoes not heard in centuries. And the statues, though still and veiled once again, felt alert, listening. Elira turned slowly, trying to piece together what had just unfolded. "You must remember, or I will never leave." That voice still clung to the edges of her thoughts. She stepped toward the pedestal with the name Agnes carved into it. The letters were no longer crude. They had become beautiful, almost reverent, as though redrawn by invisible hands. A rosary lay perfectly arranged atop the marble now, its silver cross gleaming faintly, untouched by dust. As she reached out to touch it again, a vision overtook her. Not violently, not with force, but like water rising around the ankles before one notices the tide. She blinked and found herself in a chapel, but not as she knew it. This one was intact, lit with candles that never flickered, incense that floated in still air. It was quiet, too quiet. She stood at the back, unseen, and at the front, kneeling before the altar, was the girl again. Agnes, but not a novice now. She wore a tattered black habit. Her back was hunched, as if carrying something unbearable. Her hands trembled in prayer, and behind her, a figure stood, cloaked in robes not of the church, its face hidden behind a mask of gold. No eyes, no mouth, only a smooth surface shaped like grief. The masked figure whispered something into Agnes's ear. Elira strained to hear. "The vow is broken." Agnes wept silently, bowing lower. "Then I will pay the price," Agnes whispered back. The masked figure raised a thin, pale hand and placed it gently on her head. The candles dimmed, and in a voice like cracked glass it spoke again. "And so shall all who forget." The vision cracked like glass. Elira gasped. She was back, in the crypt, alone, or not. Something was behind her. She turned sharply and saw herself, not as she was now, but younger. Eyes wider, habit cleaner, face naive. A version of herself she did not remember, but which clearly remembered her. The young Elira stepped forward, saying nothing, only watching. And behind this younger self, the 12 statues had turned their heads. Every single one. Veils now gone, faces revealed, blank, cracked, or sorrowfully human. None smiled, none prayed. All of them watched her, the real Elira, as though they too had once made vows and broken them. Her name was not Elira, not only. Part 6, The Chapel Without Sound. "You saw it," the voice said, no longer distant. "The vow, the price, and the witness." Elira stood frozen. The younger version of herself had vanished like smoke, or perhaps like a memory slipping between cracks. She looked at the statues again, no longer turned, no longer watching, but the weight of their gaze remained inside her chest. "Who are you?" she whispered. No answer, only the quiet of stone and shadows. She turned, unsure whether to leave, but the hallway behind her had vanished. The crypt no longer opened to steps or doors. It was all sealed, as if the chamber itself had wrapped around her like a tomb. And then, a soft, rhythmic sound. Drip, drip. From the ceiling. No, from the altar. She walked toward it. The silver rosary was gone. In its place, a small book, bound in red leather, no title. When she opened it, the pages inside were blank, except for one near the center written in delicate hand. "To forget is to unmake, but memory burns where silence cannot reach. Say it aloud." Elira blinked. "Say what?" And then she heard it. A chant, so faint it might have been imagined. It came from behind the altar wall, voices layered over one another. Ancient, feminine, broken. She pressed her ear against the stone. "Do not open it. Let her sleep. You promised. You lied." The voices rose, growing louder, until one cut through them all, clearer than the rest. Say my name, Illyra reeled back. The book fell from her hands, pages flipping violently in a sudden gust of wind that should not have been possible in a sealed chamber. The altar cracked. A thin fissure, glowing faintly red, crept along its surface. The air turned heavy, like thunder before a storm. She clutched her chest, not in fear, but pain. A memory was surfacing, not just a vision, but something buried. A face, a chapel, a vow she once whispered, long before her first day as a nun. Agnes, Illyra whispered, I knew you. And suddenly, she did. She remembered standing in this very crypt, younger, trembling, but smiling. Two hands clasped together, hers and Agnes's, a circle of light, a promise made in secret. We'll never leave each other, Agnes had said, even if they forget us. Illyra fell to her knees. I did, she said through tears. I forgot. The altar pulsed with warmth. And then, silence again. But it was no longer empty. Something in the air had changed, as if the dead had stopped mourning, as if someone, somewhere, had heard her. Part 7. The Promise Fulfilled. Memory burns where silence cannot reach. Illyra remained on her knees, her breath catching in shallow gasps. The silence around her no longer felt cold, but warm, almost sacred. The glowing fissure along the altar dimmed and closed. She blinked. The air no longer pressed on her chest. The crypt felt lighter. Not empty, but freed. Then faint footsteps. She turned. A figure stood at the far end of the crypt, bathed in soft amber light. Not cloaked in shadow, not veiled in fear. She recognized the posture, the gentle hands, the downturned eyes. Agnes, Illyra whispered. Agnes smiled, stepping forward slowly, her bare feet silent on the stone. You remembered, she said gently. Illyra tried to speak, but tears filled her throat. Agnes knelt before her. She reached forward, brushing the edge of Illyra's veil. You kept the vow even when you forgot. That is why it endured. I left you, Illyra whispered. You lived, Agnes replied, and in doing so, you carried both of us. The room began to shift, not with fear but with light. The statues, one by one, raised their heads, no longer cracked, no longer hollow. Each face bore a quiet smile. Some wept, some clasped their hands, but all were awake. Agnes stood. This chapel was never a tomb. It was a memory waiting to be remembered. She took Illyra's hand. It's time. Time for what? Illyra asked. Agnes turned toward the far wall. Where once had been stone, now opened a sunlit path, lined with golden green. To go, she said simply. Illyra stood, still trembling. Will I see you again? Agnes looked at her with a smile that reached eternity. You never stop seeing me. They stepped into the light together. The crypt faded behind them. No longer cold stone and shadow, but a sanctuary filled with warmth, memory, and peace. As they walked, Illyra heard singing. Not in Latin, not in chants, but voices, joyful, free, rising like morning bells. And in her chest, the weight she'd carried for so long was finally lifted. Final line, narration. Some promises are not broken by death, only by forgetting. But when remembered, even after a lifetime, they become eternal.